Great. It looks like most folks have been able to join us. So again, good morning and welcome. My name is Sarah Bolton, and I'm honored and privileged to be the president here at the College of Wooster. I'm so glad to have the chance to talk with you this morning and to give you a sense of what's happening on campus, the ways that we're navigating our current challenges and our plans for the future. And it's particularly a privilege to be able to speak with Wooster alumni, as well as with the parents and families of our students in this extraordinary, extraordinary time. We're gathered, of course, in some ways amidst familiar scenes here. If you were on campus, you'd see perhaps one of the most beautiful falls and gorgeous leaves that we've seen in many, many years. You'd see students moving around, you'd see people studying. But of course, also, we're gathered at a time that's not like any in our history. We're navigating this extraordinary, extraordinary, unprecedented challenge as a college, as a nation, and of course also around the world. And one of the things that's hardest for us right now as we're thinking about ways to run our campus is that the actions that are necessary to manage this pandemic, actions of isolation, of social distancing, of keeping people far apart from one another, those actions fly in the face of so much that is at the heart and the history of a college like Wooster, a place that is built on and founded on the power of a closely knit residential community where students live and learn and eat and play and laugh and sing together. But the thing is that the learning that students do here, those experiences that they have together inside and outside the classroom, on the playing fields and in the chorus and in the orchestra, in the dining hall and in Lowry, those experiences are more important than has ever been the case before, because the learning that students do at a place like Wooster, the ways that they prepare through their Wooster education to be leaders of character and influence in a globally interconnected society, that learning is more important than ever. And so the extraordinarily difficult moment at which we find ourselves calls for us to figure out new ways to make that critical learning happen. How do we make sure that we're still able to support students in that learning and growth? Because people who come from experiences like a Wooster education, people with global perspective, people who have a broad understanding of history and science and one another and the arts, people who know how to ask hard questions and forge a new path, people who know how to persist through all kinds of obstacles to find new ways forward. And of course, leaders who know that the best answers, the deepest innovation come from ways of collaborating with others whose experiences and lives and perspectives and knowledge are profoundly different from their own. Those leaders who can care about community and equity are more important for our nation and our world than has ever been the case before. So what I want to talk to you about today is the ways that we've worked through the course of the summer and this fall to rethink everything we do, to reconsider literally everything we do, from eating to living together to learning together, to be sure that we can preserve those crucial opportunities for learning and growth for our students throughout a situation that we knew would not just be challenging, but that would also be rapidly changing. So that we didn't need just one solution for the ways that we were going to be able to support students on campus throughout the course of this pandemic. We needed many for many different situations that might arise. So again, that's what I'd like to talk about this morning, a little bit about our planning, a little bit about where we are, and a little bit about how we're looking forward to the future. So I'm going to share my screen so that I can show you a little bit about some of our thinking. So just as a reminder, this is the Wooster that we're used to. This is the way that we're used to seeing our students learning and growing and living and experiencing their college time together. This is part of what's so powerful, not just their classroom experience, but their collective experience with one another. So as we've thought about the ways that we need to meet our mission to preserve student learning and growth in this moment, We focused on these 4 key pillars. First, of course, what are the actions that we need to take to support the health and safety of all members of our community? And I'll be talking about that in detail because obviously we've had some difficult circumstances and we've needed to make some difficult decisions. And I want to share with you how that thinking has gone and where we are at the moment. But at the same time as we're thinking about supporting health and safety, we've really focused on how we can continue to have excellent opportunities for student learning and thriving growth and preparation for their futures, regardless of the circumstances, whether that meant that students were on campus or off campus, whether that meant that they could meet in person or that they had to meet remotely, and in ways that were flexible and responsive to the needs of each individual student. Of course, we're focused on living our values and learning from our experiences during this time, and also on making sure that the college itself emerges strong and well-positioned for the future. So our watchwords as we've thought about this have really been flexibility, preparedness, and equity. And as we've been thinking about the flexibility component, there are a couple of pieces to this. One is to make sure that we understand the different circumstances that students are coming from as they're coming to the college in this moment. Some are experiencing extraordinary financial challenge, some have challenging health circumstances at home. So even more than is usually the case, we need to be flexible and prepared to work in different ways to meet students who have different needs. We also need to be flexible relative to the circumstances that we find ourselves in so that we can help students have those good experiences and learn and prepare for their futures, regardless of what may be happening around us, and to be ready to do that both in person and remotely, and to move back and forth among those circumstances, supporting students whether they're learning here on campus or across the country and around the world. And I'll talk about that a little bit as we're moving through. And the final component we've really focused on is equity. We know that this pandemic affects different families differently, that it affects individuals in ways that they may never have expected financially or from a health perspective. Making sure that we're coming to the ways that we're supporting students in ways that work for everyone, regardless of where they are, regardless of their circumstances, has been a really important focus for us. So throughout the summer, we did a lot of planning that was not just here's how we're going to run the year, but here are the many different contingencies for which we should be prepared. And here are the frameworks that we should use to make our decisions. And those frameworks include the campus public health situation, the community public health situation, and even broader national circumstances, as well as evolving science that we would use to make our decisions. So let me start by talking about our public health strategies, because our first component, our first area of focus is always the health and safety of our community. As all of you know, we started the summer by focusing on ways that we could prevent transmission of illness. That means focusing on airborne transmission, that's universal mask wearing, but also changing the ways that our HVAC systems and filtration systems work, and also focusing on surface transmission, making sure that we have additional, almost twice as much actually, custodial support on campus to clean surfaces and make sure that there's no transmission of illness in that way. Obviously, over the course of the fall, the science has evolved, focusing more and more on airborne transmission and less on surface transmission. And so we've continued to evolve our thinking and our work in that way as well, particularly looking at the ways that we're working with filtration and HVAC in all of our buildings. Of course, we also want to know when there are cases of COVID-19 on our campus and to be able to respond to isolate and support individuals who may test positive, as well as to quarantine their close contacts. And that's one of the key public health strategies for keeping people safe during a pandemic. We made the decision long before it was recommended statewide or nationally to test all students on arrival. That was far beyond what was actually called for nationally at that time, although it's now recommended. That was to make sure that we were setting up a safe environment for students to study on arrival. And then we also committed to regular surveillance testing for COVID-19. And this is one of the areas where our primary commitment to constantly follow new science and new public health advice as our work evolved has really been evident. When I first talked to you, those of you who are parents in the summer, we were looking at testing 50 to 100 students a week as a way of monitoring the public health of the community by sampling students broadly across it. As the science evolved and as our campus activities increased, we've actually rapidly increased our testing, so that where we started in our first weeks of surveillance testing, of testing 50 or 60 students a week, we're now testing 500 or 600 students a week, so 10 times as much. One third of colleges and universities around the country who are regularly testing a significant portion of their students for COVID-19. And we continue to increase that. Those of you who are current parents know that we are today testing every single student on campus in one day. We've also focused on symptom monitoring, daily symptom monitoring as a way of hearing from every student and knowing whether they may have symptoms that are associated with COVID. That's been an important component of our strategy and one that we've been able to watch. I'll also say that especially as we move into flu season, that symptom monitoring is complex. We've had many students who've had symptoms who have turned out not to have COVID. And that's been true for employees as well. So watching those symptoms and testing everyone who reports any symptoms, supporting those students has been a key component of our work. But we also know that asymptomatic transmission is a really important way that COVID is transmitted, particularly among young adult populations. And so we've been, again, evolving our strategy, just as we've emphasized airborne transmission more than surface transmission in recent weeks. We've also emphasized testing, increased the emphasis on testing beyond what we're doing with symptom monitoring. Of course, isolation, quarantine, and contact tracing are the key partners to testing and surveillance for COVID-19. Testing by itself is not any kind of magic, but if you do the testing and you're then able to rapidly isolate and quarantine students and to trace their contacts to be sure that you have drawn a net around any areas where there may be transmission, that's what makes testing powerful as a public health strategy to support the health of the community. We're continuing to evolve our education and communication and the public health campaigns that we set up at the beginning of the year. Here on campus, as you've seen, I'm sure, a lot of signs for wear your masks, keep your distance. We've continued to evolve those as we've understood some of the areas where there has been transmission of illness. So for example, we learned that some students had transmitted illness by simply not doing anything that was a violation of the rules, but by simply eating in small groups, but too close together in too small of a space. So we're continuing to broaden the education that we have available to students and to emphasize the new things that we're learning and that our peer colleges are learning as we do this work. And finally, I'll just say that the ongoing monitoring of new science and public health advice has been critical to us, as well as our own work on campus to assess the patterns that we're seeing and the ways that we need to dynamically adjust our strategies. We're also working with broader networks. As you know, that we work both with our local public health department, but also with the College of Public Health and with Wexner Medical Center at Ohio State University to be responding to the changes that they're seeing, to new best practices in mitigation and support that they're seeing, as well as to work with new testing strategies. And those are constantly evolving, and we expect to have new strategies in place later this semester, as well as for next semester in addition. So as we put together these public health strategies, as I said earlier, we focused on a sequence of things that we would definitely do, but also on a set of contingency plans that we would undertake should we begin to see the spread of COVID-19 on our campus. And as all of you know, for the first couple of months that students were here, for all of August and all of September, we were able to work with our first plan, which was the one that was purely around prevention, because we were not seeing any COVID-19 cases on campus. After those first couple of months, we did begin to see a couple of cases tick up, and then we moved quickly to use the strategies that we developed to make decisions to stop the transmission of illness and to bring back those clusters so that we could return the campus as quickly as possible to one with the best public health that we could have. So what I wanted to show you now was a little bit about our data. You're the first people to see this, and this is just to give you a sense of what the trends are that we've seen on campus. I'm showing here only October. So only this month, which is the place where we've begun to see a few cases on campus, where we did see the increase, and to help you understand how that's informed our decision-making and the actions that we've taken for public health to return the campus as quickly as possible to a good situation. So what you're looking at here in the data, the gold bars are the number of tests that we ran daily, and the black bars are the number of positive tests that we saw. And what you can see here is our increasing of the numbers of individuals that we're testing over the course of October. All of this is already way ramped up. Remember, I told you we were doing only 50 or 60 tests per week in September, which was fine at that time. And you can see here us surging and increasing the number of tests per week, tenfold over the course of from the middle of September to the middle of October. You can also see here that the beginnings of the positive tests that we saw in the early weeks of October here. This is based on the date of the test. So a few students testing on the 6th, the 7th, and then more on the 8th. And one of the things that I think is important to understand here is that the testing we're doing has a random component and a focused component. So if you look here, for example, on October 12th, you see this large number of positive tests, more than 30 positive tests on October 12th. What's happening there? On that day, we were focused on testing around the contacts of those that we knew had been positive in this prior week. So we had quickly figured out through contact tracing who were the individuals who were socially connected, who had been at the same events with some of the individuals who tested positive this week. Here we are testing really essentially only those individuals. And you can see that on that one day, we actually captured the majority of people who then turned out to have a positive test, to have gotten COVID through this initial set of clusters. From there, you can see that we're continuing to increase the number of tests we're doing, but the proportion of those tests that are turning up positive is decreasing again. This is our most recent data going into this week. So Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of last week. And you can see that the percentage of individuals that we're testing who are positive is still not zero. And let me be super clear, 0 is the number that we want, but it's significantly decreased from the prior week. And so we can see our testing, quarantining, and contact tracing and isolation strategies having a positive impact here. Now, of course, what you're seeing here doesn't show the decisions, the really difficult decisions that we've made throughout the course of our work with these illness clusters. And we need to talk about those as well. So what I've added here in this slide are the places where we made a decision. Here's our first decision on October 10th, after we'd seen these cases coming through in the prior week, to take classes to remote only, to pause athletic practices, to close the library. So there's a set of decisions made here that are associated with our campus going from its kind of status quo operations to a level of operations that are minimizing circulation of students, that are minimizing contact among students, that move, for example, from in-person eating to grab and go. So that's this initial set of decisions are happening right here. We got a lot of different reactions to those initial decisions, I'll be honest with you. Some folks told us that we moved too soon. Others felt that we should have moved sooner. But I'm very clear that we moved really quickly, right? As soon as we started to see these clusters of COVID, we moved rapidly, as we had planned to our first contingency plan, which was a temporary suspension of in-person classes and a temporary suspension of other in-person activities to minimize the spread of illness on campus. So then you see this week again, where we were doing a lot of testing. This is the week I reported to you by email of seeing over the course of the week a total of 73 positive tests. And here at the end of last week, we make this second decision, right? And the second decision we make is the even harder one, right? That's the decision that we're going to continue to work largely remotely for the coming weeks through November. And I want to talk a little bit about how that decision was made as well. And it was made on the basis of planning that we've done in the summer. The components that go into our summer planning for this kind of decision are the current campus health situation and its trends, our current ability to making sure that if students do become ill, we have the capacity to support them, making sure that our own wellness capacity is maintained so that we can take care of students who are ill, but also paying attention to the local public health situation. We had seen both increasing numbers of positive cases in our local area and increasing numbers of positive cases in Ohio, right? So that's a set of decisions that we needed to pay attention to, a set of trends we needed to pay attention to. And then we also needed to pay attention to what best helps us preserve students' learning opportunities. There are opportunities for learning and growth and preparation for their futures. And as we saw the number of cases that were coming through last week, even though our mitigation efforts were successful, we were continuing to see new cases pop up that suggested community transmission beyond the original clusters. And we were also very clear that constantly switching back and forth between in-person learning and remote learning, that disruption was very difficult for students and also difficult for faculty and staff to be able to maintain and plan for a high quality experience for students throughout. So last Friday, as you know, we made the hard decision, advised by our local public health as well as by our Ohio State advisors, to not just move to temporary remote learning, but to hold on to that model through the semester. And I know this is not what any of us had hoped for, and I'm so sorry that it's where we've ended up. What we've done through doing this, though, is to be able to make plans for the rest of the semester, to support students and families in the decisions that you want and need to make, and to be able to be sure that we're in a situation to not just return the campus to a good public health situation, but be able to do that in a way that sustains a campus experience for students if they choose to stay. So where are we with next steps? So with next steps, as I said, we're testing everybody today. With that, we'll be able to get a good baseline to understand the breadth and make sure that we've caught really every case of COVID that's on campus, to isolate, quarantine, and support students who need to be separated for the larger community for health reasons. And then hopefully to be able to return the campus operation to one that's a little bit more flexible and supportive, not quite so locked down for the students who are here right now. Health and safety is our top priority, but as we move to a better situation, which we expect to continue to do, we're also looking to be able to reopen some things for students. Classes will remain remote, but we want to be able to make sure that students, if possible, safely are able to gather, to learn from one another, to be in community with one another a little bit more over the course of the remaining days if they do choose to stay on campus. Now, we're getting a lot of questions about spring planning. And that makes a lot of sense. What I want to say about that is that we're taking everything that we're learning from this semester, not just on our own campus, but by looking at the experiences of other campuses and using it to feed into our spring decisions. So we will certainly evolve our testing strategy. We will certainly make changes in the ways that we use, for example, wastewater testing. We'll move into having that for the spring. We'll have a number of other approaches this spring to help make sure that we're able to build a plan that supports students as best as possible as we look forward. So I wanted to just finish by saying a few things about the ways that we've planned our academic and community engagement through the course of this fall, and then a little bit more about things that are happening beyond the pandemic. So first, as we were planning academic and community life for this fall, we really focused on making sure that we could support everybody. So we built these summer classes for new students. Our new students were able to take remote classes, which many people enjoyed. Our faculty spent a lot of time this summer preparing for flexible teaching so that they would be able to teach in person or remotely and to go back and forth as the circumstances called for. Our clubs and teams and musical groups figured out ways in advance that they would be able to gather and practice in new ways, and also in ways that would be inclusive, whether students were on campus or off. And these are some of the scenes that you would see on campus this fall. In the early part of the fall, we had a lot of things happening in person. Here's our band practicing with masks, students in community engagement, a classroom happening in a tent, some athletic practices. These are student science clubs that are working to introduce students to the different kinds of activities happening on campus. But one of the things that you don't see when you look at all of this in-person activity that was taking place, particularly throughout the month of September and late August, is that behind that, there's a whole lot happening to engage students and to bring them into community remotely. So here you see our alumni panel discussion that's coming up in preparation for the election that's virtual with alumni in politics. This is popcorn that the English department was serving relative to their movie night, virtual movie night with in-person popcorn. We've had virtual concerts, virtual trivia nights, virtual comedy nights. So we were prepared all the way through to engage students remotely as well as in person, and we're continuing to do that now. So as we think about the flexibility and equity we've put together for students, again, we wanted to really make it possible for students to choose what's best for them and their families, to study on campus or remotely. About 80% have been on campus, but we've continued, as we've experienced these clusters of COVID-19, to provide that option for students and for families on campus or remotely. Throughout, we've made all courses available to all students. So whether students are here or remote, on campus or around the world, we wanted to make the full curriculum available to them. Through the generosity of Wooster alumni and families, we've been able to provide special COVID grants and emergency funds for students and families who are experiencing exceptional financial strain through this time. We redid our course schedule in a way that works for campus and for learners around the world. And we've made sure that things like academic supports and library resources are available to students, whether things are happening in person or remotely, whether those students are here in Wooster or around the world. And our student clubs are being led that way too. Our students are coming together to learn and lead, including those who are here and those who are around the world. There are clubs being led by students who are across the country and around the world, and others by those who are here on campus. So just to finish up and focus a little bit on the further distance now that we've talked about the campus situation a little bit more, I wanted to just provide an update on where we are with our strategic plan that's focused on strengthening the experience for Wooster students, not just now through this pandemic, but over the course of the coming decade. And here our areas of focus have been diversity, internationality, equity, and inclusion, making sure that we continue to have a vibrant, connected campus community that's inclusive and enjoyable for students from across the country and around the world. We've also focused on academic innovation and connected learning, making sure that students have opportunities to study the right things that will be powerful for their futures, but also connecting their classroom experiences to action and to a strong launch after college. So I want to just give you a few updates of things that have happened there. Over the past couple of years, as we focused on those ideas of applied and connected learning, we've developed a set of new majors, many of which are interdisciplinary, bringing together different ways of studying a problem to prepare students to innovate and to make contributions in the problems that are going to be most important, the questions that are going to be most important for their futures. So education, environmental studies, global media and digital studies, environmental geoscience and data science are some of our new majors. We've also put together new core requirements to be sure that students, every student, is prepared to bring the tools that are most critical to helping them contribute and make an impact in their communities on whatever questions are most important to them. So making sure everyone learns about global engagement, about working in a diverse community, about quantitative analysis as they make their way through. We have new programs as well that help students make that stronger connection between their campus learning and the work that they're going to do after they graduate. And there are many of these, but I wanted to just talk about two of them. One is our Pathways program. This is a brand new program launching this spring that is available to every student, no matter what their major, and that gives them the opportunity to couple a set of connected classes on campus with a set of experiential learning opportunities outside in the world. And those experiential learning opportunities might be internships, civic engagement, applied research, working with local agencies or businesses or nonprofits. And they come together to give them a focused exploration of an area that they might be interested in after college. So we've just had a set of these approved by the faculty. We had over 50 faculty working all summer to develop these initial pathways to help students make those connections between what they're studying on campus and what they'd like to do in the world. And some of the initial ones that we've put together include public health, activism and social change, entrepreneurship, digital studies, museum studies, and public history. And there are more of these coming. Students have been very excited about the ways that they can knit together these experiential opportunities and their classroom learning to supplement the learning that they do in their major and prepare for a great launch after college. Of course, one of the great resources that we have as students consider their futures and the ways that they want to take their lives after college is the Fighting Scots, our large and wonderful alumni body who are out doing such important things across the country and around the world in every field of endeavor. So we've put a real emphasis on making it easy for students to connect to alumni. And we started doing this especially this past spring as seniors in the class of 2020 were graduating and trying to find their way in such an extraordinarily disrupted job market and world. So we put together this platform, which now has more than 1,000 alumni in it and many hundreds of students, where students can easily connect to alumni in fields that they're interested in, to work with those alumni as mentors and guides as they explore and consider their futures. So those are just a couple of the things that we've been doing in connected learning and academic innovation. And then, of course, in our work in diversity, internationality, equity, and inclusion, we've continued to focus on making sure that we preserve this great strength of our campus, which is that our students come from such a broad range of experiences and perspectives across the United States as well as around the world. There's an enormous pushback through this pandemic against the idea of internationality. We are deeply invested in it, and it's a pillar of our mission. We're going to keep making sure that it's possible for students to come here from around the world. But as much as we do that, of course, just who you bring is not enough. We need to make sure that our community is inclusive, that it's actively pushing back against discrimination and racism, and that it's becoming an ever more excellent place for students to have their campus experience, and an ever more equitable place for students to learn and grow together. So we're strengthening resources for students to learn about issues of justice and to develop the capacities to lead and make a difference after they graduate. We're increasing support and opportunity for students who are from historically marginalized groups, or for students who are experiencing financial strain or difficulty, first-generation college students. And we're engaging with the community in the city of Wooster too, to make sure that not just our campus is a better place, a more equitable and just place for students to live and learn and grow, but that our city is as well. So the last thing that I wanted to mention as we're developing our vibrant community is some work that we're doing in planning for our spaces. You may know, if you have students here, that we've been renovating our dorms and trying to make those ever better places for students to live and learn. But we've also really been focused on the Lowry Center, the heart of our community, the place where that living and learning together happens, even now. Even today, as things are limited in the ways that students can interact, Lowry is at the heart of what we do. And for more than a decade, the campus has been aware that the Lowry Center needs some help, that dining spaces could really be improved, but also that we could think about the ways that that space draws students together for living and learning and leading, and the ways that it supports their daily experience. We've learned from Apex that having the services that support students all gathered together in one place lowers barriers and makes it much easier for students to get what they need. And that if we can create a space that's easy for students to see what's happening and to connect, both to connect with one another and to connect with the folks who support them, that students will be much more drawn in and much more able to benefit from the extraordinary community of which they're a part. So this is a design process that's been moving along, and we have a whole discussion focused just on the Lowry renovation this afternoon. But for those of you who are just joining us this morning, I wanted to just show you a couple of pictures. So the planning is focused not on a giant, expansive addition, not on something that's extra or unnecessarily fancy, but on making sure that every square foot of space in Lowry is used to the best purpose for students' experience. So what we're looking at is just a small addition on the front here that creates new space and new connectedness. And then on a renovation of all of the space so that all of it is available for students to use all of the time. And so that it brings those services that are most important to supporting students that are currently scattered all over the campus and hard for students to access, all into one place, into a hub of support for them as individuals and as support for them for the work that they want to do collectively. So here's just a couple of other pictures. This is an idea of what it would look like coming into the new Lowry. Here you see a quote from our founder, Willis Lord, talking about the fact that Wooster is not just a place for all studies, but a place for all students. And you can see the ways that this is a light, bright space that students can see one another and connect to what's taking place around the building. Just a last item for Lowry. This is the upstairs floor. This is the place that would have an Apex-like feel with student services built around the building. So this is coming up the stairs here. This is the Dean of Students office, student activities, residential life, and the Center for Diversity and Inclusion. And then along the side here, lots of opportunities for student clubs and organizations to gather. The Voice is here, the student government is here, and many, many places to meet, to gather, to connect, and of course, for that powerful learning that students do together. So that concludes the campus update that I wanted to provide. I know we've covered a lot of ground here, from our COVID data to our plans for the future, and I'm really delighted again to be able to be with you this morning and now to answer any questions that you may have. So the way you can ask questions is to pose them in the question and answer box. And I know many folks will probably have similar questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the next half hour or so. So a great question here about how from one of our pretty local alumni up in Cleveland, about how the college is caring for our international students at this time. Are they home or on campus? Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and the answer is both. We cared for international students throughout the spring when many folks couldn't get home. We kept our international students here. We supported them with programming and with food. We kept many international students here over the summer for whom going home was difficult. And as we go into the fall, we're still supporting international students to do what's best for them. So we have several hundred international students here on campus, but we also had students who did choose to go home as the international borders opened up, and that became more possible for them. So we have a large number of international students also studying remotely from their homes. And we've actually, part of the adjustments that we made to the course schedule as we planned for this year were adjustments to make sure that there were courses available in time zones that would work, or at times that would work for students in a variety of time zones, and that those would be accessible to students, around the world. We have a number of students who are away now who've planned to return for the spring in person. But obviously, as the public health situation is evolving, both in the US as well as internationally, we're continuing to provide the flexibility for students to make those decisions in the way that's best for them, and responsive to the real-time situation. Another question about study abroad and whether it's on hold. It has So it was on hold for this fall, but we had an individual application process. So again, around this idea of flexibility and responsiveness to real-time public health situations. So we do in fact have 8 students in study away programs this fall who were able to petition and explain why the particular ones that they were applying to were ones that would be stable and good places for students to be throughout this fall. And that's worked well for those students who were there. And we're doing the same thing for the spring. That as a whole, we're not having a lot of study abroad this spring, but we are allowing students to petition individually and to assess what those particular situations are. How does social distancing work in the dorms with roommates and shared bathrooms? Yeah, that's a great question. So, here we've worked with our local public health folks as well as others around the country to get the sense of the best ways to make safe congregate living, because that's what we're doing is congregate living. But we work as hard as we can to make it safe. So the expectation for students when they're in their dorms is that they're wearing their mask all the time, except when they're in their own room. And that has worked pretty well. In the bathrooms, obviously you are unmasked some of the time, but we're encouraging students to spend as little time unmasked as possible. And I would say as a whole that has been effective, throughout the fall. We have seen some transmission within dorms and social circles. Most of that seems to have been associated not just with having roommates or using the bathrooms, but more with things like students gathering to eat, which are unmasked and speaking. So one of the things we focused on recently is ways to avoid that kind of situation. At Wooster, as at many of our peers, students having roommates by itself has not proven to be untenable, but it's certainly we're paying extra attention to those dorms that are higher density. So we're testing more frequently there. We've been focusing our testing on the higher density dorms in the last couple of weeks to make sure that we're able to support students there as effectively as possible, because it's extra important in a higher density situation that we catch any illness that there may be and isolate people as quickly as possible. Have we been able to determine what behaviors or activities led to the positive cases on October 12th, 13th, and 14th? What's being done to discourage that behavior if at all possible? Yeah, thank you for that question. So there's a set of behaviors that I think are seem to be indicated. And one thing I'll say is that we began to have positive cases a couple of weeks after we began to permit students to be off campus more. We knew that keeping students just in the campus bubble was not likely to be tenable for the entire semester. It's just very difficult for students to be kind of trapped on campus. But it is true that the more students were off campus, especially as our local cases were becoming significant, it may be, and we don't know that for sure, it may be that there was illness that was associated with students going off campus. We will probably never be able to track that back. Of course, we're never going to be a perfect bubble. This is not the NBA, right? Our employees live and work in the community. Our students need to go to the grocery store. But we're paying attention to that question of going off campus and thinking about, right now, of course, that's not allowed, right? We've returned to not allowing students to go off campus, but thinking for the future, what are the right ways to modify that? So that's one piece. A second component, as I mentioned in my emails to campus, was some social events. Now, I don't want you to be thinking about the kind of social events that you saw at big universities. We have not had any social events of, hundreds of people doing outrageous things. What we're talking about is social events of maybe 10, 15, 20 individuals, which is certainly beyond what we were permitting, which was going up to 10. Some of those may have been unmasked under certain circumstances, and we're looking into those. So these are violations of our code of conduct that are being looked into and investigated, and students will go through a conduct process. We absolutely have removed individuals from campus who violated our code of conduct. We've removed quite a number of individuals from campus, and we're continuing to work to make it clear to people that those behaviors, which students may imagine as not very risky because they don't seem big or wild or at scale, that those behaviors are dangerous. And in fact, that's what we're also seeing in the local community. When I talk to our local public health folks and I say, where are you seeing spread? They say family events of 10 or 20 people where folks were unmasked, right? Church events of 10 or 20 people where folks were unmasked. So what our students were doing was definitely a violation of our expectations, and it's not acceptable, and we're holding them accountable. But it is the same kind of mistake that people are making in communities beyond colleges and universities, which comes from that urge to try to come together, not in giant groups, but even in modest sized groups that can create that kind of spread. And the same thing is true for eating together, right? If you have 4 friends eating in your room, that's definitely a violation of our code of conduct. It's not outrageous behavior, but it absolutely has been the source of some of this spread. So we're continuing to share that with students. And unfortunately, I think the hard decisions that we've had to make to stop many of our in-person activities have reinforced for students how important that is. So there's a kind of collective information there, as well as, of course, individual accountability. There's a great question here about how folks can contribute to supporting the college at this time, in addition to financial support, which is, of course, really important. I do want to, again, thank those of you who contribute to the Student Needs Fund, to the Black Student Equity Fund, to the other kinds of emergency funds that have enabled us to maintain access and equity for students through times when their families may be in extraordinary crisis. We have had students who've lost family members, as well as, of course, had family members lose entirely their income through the pandemic. So I thank you for that. But there's also the question of what further support, and this is coming from an alumnus. I think that the connections that alumni are able to make to our students, for example, through the Fighting Scots Career Connections, are so crucial at this time, because our students, especially our juniors or seniors, are looking out into an economy, a global economy that's in crisis, and wondering, how on earth will I take this education and go out into the world and make my way? So those of you who are out there, whatever kind of field of endeavor you're in, if you're willing to connect to a student, to provide that mentorship from a distance, to help them think about what it looks like to interview virtually successfully, to help connect, perhaps to provide some internships that can take place virtually, those kinds of things are just tremendously valuable. The Scott family is even more important to our students than it has ever been before. And I would also say the Scott family has already become more available to our students than it ever has before, because of our ability to meet virtually like we're doing today, the kinds of panels we've been able to do. We've been able to bring alumni to our students on campus virtually in ways that we never have before. So thanks to all of you who've been part of that. Yes, there's a question, are arrangements being made for students who need to go into labs or studios for IS research? Yes, absolutely. We have maintained that priority, that deep Wooster priority for students from the beginning. So even 2 weeks ago now, when we moved away from in-person classes, we explicitly preserved the access to labs for individual students and the access to studios for individual students for independent study. So that has never stopped. My home here is right next door to the Severance and to Ruth Williams Hall of Life Science, and I see students going there all the time. We have additional precautions in place that we've developed with faculty and with our safety committees, but students continue to have that access and to do that research. There's a question about staff. Do we have ways to isolate or quarantine staff who don't have a home situation that allows for isolation or quarantining? Yeah, those are a really great question. We actually haven't had any staff transmission. So I think I really appreciate this question. So we have we have essentially no staff or faculty who've tested positive. We have no staff or faculty who've tested positive who've been on campus. So it's clear that those few individuals who may have had positive tests have actually, that's been community transmission, not campus transmission. So we actually have set up from the beginning a lot of really strong protections to be sure that there couldn't be illness passed back and forth among staff or between staff and students. And those have held very, very effectively. So we haven't had a situation where we have staff or faculty who are ill. In terms of people being able to isolate or quarantine beyond their homes, unfortunately, we can't provide those services on campus for employees. But the local public health department has actually thought about those things, and so they're the ones who are able to support people in the community beyond the campus. I have a great question about voting. What arrangements have been made for students who are restricted to campus and are quarantined to vote? So we've been supporting students in preparing absentee ballots from the beginning. And as 2 weeks ago, we moved away from in-person activities, we knew that students who had been planning to vote in person that would need rapid support to move to absentee ballot opportunities, and we've pivoted in that way. So we're set up to help students apply for their absentee ballot and to return those ballots through work at the Lowry Center. I will say, to the enormous credit of our students, the two things that we've got asked about most over the last 2 weeks is how can I vote and when can I go back to the library? And can I just say, I am so proud of our students. The things that they care about are really important things. How many students are still residing on campus? So this is a little bit fluid because, again, we focused on flexibility. We wanted to be sure that students who wanted and needed to stay could stay, and that students who wanted and needed to go could go. And that flexibility extends from now all the way to the end of the semester. So it's not like there was a deadline and you had to make a single decision. All semester, we've said to students, we want to be here for you in the way that works best for you. So all semester, students have been supported in making the decision that's best for them. So we have still, at the beginning of this semester, we had about 1,500 students on campus and about 350 studying remotely. That evolved a little bit over time. We still have, I think, more than 1,200 students on campus as of today. There were students who chose to leave last weekend. I think many students and families are still making that decision, some based on where the direction of public health situation is evolving, and I think that will continue to improve, but others based on what it looks like for them personally or socio-emotionally to either be here or be at home, what works best for them for studying, and also some waiting to see whether there'll be some more flexibility on campus that will be helpful to them. So I think that's rapidly evolving. There's a question about whether there are concerns regarding on-campus student safety in light of the impending election. Yeah, thank you for that question. We've thought a lot about election preparation, and there's a whole range of preparations around the election that we've done. And we want to think about student safety and well-being, student learning and voting engagement, and then just student emotional well-being and support. So we've put together program. Actually, if you go on wooster.edu and type in voting in 2020, you'll see a whole program. There's a lot of programs, sort of informational and discussion programs with campus experts and alumni experts. There's also a lot of support programming around well-being, all of which is offered virtually, individual support, collective support, stress reduction, yoga, things that happen both before and after November 3rd. At the same time, we have an emergency response team whose whole job over the course of the many years that it's been in place is to plan in case of various kinds of emergencies that might happen. So for example, that group has been doing planning exercises for more than a year around questions of, what would happen if there were to be a protest or an action that included threats of violence that came through the city and, for example, came through our campus. How would we so that's the most extreme situation. We don't anticipate that, but we're always ready for that to know, how would we have students be safe in their dorms? How would we take care of them? How would we communicate? All of those kinds of things have been planned for in advance. In kind of intermediate situations where there may just be students feel more concerned about moving around safely on campus in the wake of the election, for example. We've planned more specific things around having additional opportunities for students to be accompanied if they move around campus, other ways for students to get food that don't involve having to walk to Lowry, things of that kind. So those are all still being developed. Can we talk about how we've adjusted mental health services during this time of stress. Yeah, absolutely. And we've done a number of things. I mentioned some of them. We have, regular stress reduction activities. Those are available virtually. We have Zoom yoga. We have Zoom meditation. We have, we've added a lot more Let's Talk, which are kind of drop-in mental health sessions. So not necessarily an ongoing therapeutic relationship, but a drop-in opportunity that students can come just for a short period of time and kind of navigate where they are, figure out what resources would be helpful to them. We've added a counselor in the community so to add some additional hours and kind of more individual support. There's been a particular interest from students to be sure that we had a more diverse set of counselors, including counselors of color. We've been able to do that actually just this fall. So there have been a number of steps there. I will also say that faculty and staff support is also an important part of what we thought about. So we've been focusing on making sure that there are resources for faculty and staff as well as for students. And all of these resources, 100% of these resources are available virtually and all operating fully virtually. What are the plans for spring athletics? What a great question. Our conference, as well as the NCAA, are working constantly looking at the updates in public health, the updates in information about what would be required. So we'll be figuring those things out with the best science that we have, the best public health information that we have, and the new tools. I think one thing that's really important to think about as we think about spring semester is that the tools that we have to operate safely and to protect our community in the face of this pandemic are constantly evolving, right? So when we started the semester, it was pretty hard to get good testing with a reasonable turnaround in our part of the country. It's become easier, and that's part of how we've been able to evolve and surge our testing from 60 a week to 600 a week. Now the antibody testing is becoming more available. So instead of waiting 2 days for a test result, it's becoming, again, just this week, we started to get antibody tests at volume. It's becoming more possible to have tools that can give you an initial read on the likelihood that somebody has COVID illness in real time. And those have been scientifically available, but they weren't available to put in people's hands until just recently. So we know that we'll have new tools available as we look into the spring, but since all of this is so rapidly evolving, we are needing to make some decisions relatively close to the moment at which those will actually be enacted. And that's partly just to be sure we're making the best use of new tools. There's a question about whether students will still be able to get their flu shots on campus in the next few weeks. I hope so is the answer. I was actually thinking about the overnight last night. How could we make that happen? Part of that has to do with making sure that the clusters of illness that we've seen are kind of fully suppressed, that we're in a good situation. Right now, our medical staff is really focused on supporting those students who have tested positive, making sure that they're doing okay. They're checking in with them twice a day, making sure that nobody has symptoms of concern, connecting them to additional resources if they need them. So that's been their primary focus. As our numbers continue to diminish, we'll be able to repivot to flu testing, we anticipate, and also to undertake a flu clinic in a way that's fully safe for everybody involved. So we would definitely like to get to that. It's going to require having the additional confidence in our public health situation that I think will come from the data that we get from this comprehensive round of testing today and the follow-up from that. So I can't give you a date, but it's definitely something we'd like to do for students and staff and faculty. We had that planned. Will Moot Court be available in the spring semester? Great question. Yeah, Moot Court has been available all fall. Moot Court has been running nationally, virtually, and I anticipate that the spring semester will have a lot of those kinds of activities still happening virtually because even if campus situations are in good position, I think very few folks are likely to want to do that highest risk thing of taking a group of people from one spot, flying them in to mix with a lot of people from a lot of other spots, and then flying back. That's one of the most challenging situations to keep safe. So I would anticipate that a lot of activities, Model UN, Moot Court, things like that will continue to be virtual. How are the seniors with more performance-based independent studies doing? Are there music, theater, and art majors who are able to defer their performances in these times? Yeah, this is a really, really great question. And again, another place that we've been operating fluidly. There have been theater rehearsals that have happened virtually. There actually have been music performances that happened in person, even as recently as a couple of weeks ago. I know that there's some dancers that are preparing some work, and they've tried to make those small, right? 3 dancers, not 33 dancers. So all of that has been evolving, leveraging technology to do some pieces, and then doing some other components that are perhaps live but individual. How are we doing as regards to diversity? What is the percentage of Black students? What's the percentage of Black faculty? Data is often reported, but interested in Black Americans. Yeah, thank you very much for that question. We're actually preparing some more public dashboards to report on that. The percentage of Black students now, I believe, is about, I'm just going to get the right number. I think it's about 7 or 8% of the population. We've started counting in the last 3 or 4 years, students who report multiple races or ethnicities. And so the number you get depends a little bit on how students are self-categorizing, whether they're categorizing as Black or as multiracial or multi-ethnic there. We've made a progress actually in recruiting Black faculty. We're actually just we've put a couple of programs in place, including a commitment to multiple hires in Africana studies to build and strengthen that department, which is so crucial right now. So we'll have 3 new people in that department, 1 new leader who's just been hired, building on the extraordinary and historic work of Josephine Wright and other leaders in that department, and then additional new people coming on board. How are students cared for when they have COVID or are living in isolation? Where are they housed, and how are they isolated? Who provides their medical care? This is a great question. So our isolation spaces are largely on campus, and we've used different campus spaces. A number of them are some of our smaller houses. We've also used the Wooster Inn for isolation, and as well as some of the apartment type spaces. Once students have tested positive, there's no need for them to be isolated from other people who have tested positive. And in fact, it's better for them not to be just totally, entirely alone. So places that we have, like the Fair Lawn Apartments, where there are a couple of bedrooms and a bathroom, kitchen, many of these isolated students are not symptomatic, or they may have just mild symptoms. So being able to have a friend is not a bad thing. We've tried in some cases where we can to house students together. So if a student and their roommate or the student and their housemate are both positive, ideally they would be in the same isolation spaces, so they maintain some social contact and some ability to be connected with one another. Our wellness staff checks on them twice virtually, twice a day, twice every day for each one of those students. And then they connect them to the other medical care they might need, which could include visiting, if necessary, with someone in our wellness center, or being supported by the local hospital or other local medical resources. That's the way we're supporting them. Do the current faculty have, this is a totally non-COVID question. Do the current faculty have the required expertise for all of the new majors you listed, or will you have to hire new faculty? No, this is the beauty part. What we did is we were focusing on new majors was to really, and this is true for the pathways as well, to pay attention to areas where faculty were already developing interest and expertise, and where they wanted to come together across disciplines to strengthen and provide a new opportunity for students. So, for example, that environmental geoscience major is drawing from new directions of interest in our earth sciences department, that historic, wonderful geoscience department that many alumni remember. Many folks there were already focusing more and more on environmental topics and on those intersections. As they were hiring and looking at their own curriculum, they were already wanting to develop in that direction. So it's the shape of those new majors are certainly shaping and nuancing some of the ways that we're hiring within and across departments, but they're also building from directions of interest that faculty were already seeing and already moving in. How are students with disabilities, learning or otherwise being supported during this time? Yeah, this is a wonderful question, and I'm so glad that you asked it. So APEX, our Center for Advising, Planning, and Experiential Learning, also includes the Learning Center. And that Learning Center in the spring, of course, had to really quickly pivot to supporting students remotely, but also to learning a great deal about which kinds of virtual and remote technologies are kind of broadly accessible for students with learning differences of a wide variety of kinds, and what kinds of new approaches to equity and to accommodations to be sure that the work that we're doing is truly accessible would be needed in different contexts. And that truly runs the gamut from understanding, you know, which video conferencing systems have automatic captioning, for example, for students who might be hearing impaired, but also thinking about, as we're physically teaching in person, but everybody 6 feet apart, and therefore in a much bigger room with people much further apart, how does that work for a student, for example, with hearing or visual limitations, right? So we've brought new technologies to bear and thinking to bear around students with different learning challenges or different disabilities. We brought that information to bear, not just for virtual work, but actually for in-person work as well, because even our in-person work is different than it would be when you could all be, you know, packed in close, and, you know, a student might have a way of accommodating their disability that involved just sitting in the front of the room as close to the professor as possible. And of course, you know, not being able to see people's mouths move is its own challenge. We have, in some cases, worked around having transparent masks and other approaches there. But we've also, in many cases, made mixtures of in-person meetings, but also using technology to leverage those to help students with different learning needs. Can students be COVID tested before they return home at the end of the semester? So yeah, we actually, we're going to continue to be testing students all the time. Between now and the end of the semester, all the students on campus are going to be tested frequently, all for the next month before they go home at the end of the semester. And even just this week, if students requested to be tested before they went home, we've been providing that testing. I want to be super clear, though, that a test is not a guarantee that an individual doesn't have COVID or doesn't acquire COVID on their way home. So what we've said to students really clearly, even now, if they're leaving campus, is that they are free to be tested if they wish to be tested, but no matter what they do, they really should be careful and treat themselves as if they are in quarantine when they first return to wherever they're going home, for example, after they leave campus. So they should be wearing masks, even in the house. They should be, not cuddling up with their family as much as they really want to, because even if you test negative, you could have acquired COVID a couple of days before and not yet have enough virus to test positive. You could acquire an illness while traveling home. And so we've really encouraged students to be careful when they travel home and to maintain distancing and masking even once they're home, at least for 10 to 14 days. The test can be a complement to that, but it doesn't replace that caution. And that's true for travel anywhere, really. Are we planning to support international students who will graduate next year with respect to OPT and job searches, since the current situation is less favorable, especially if they are out of the US? Yes. Having students who come from around the world is one of the best things about the College of Wooster. It's one of the most powerful pieces of a Wooster education. We are absolutely committed, 100% committed, to continuing to welcome students from around the world and to continuing to fight for what we need to fight for to make it work for them to be in the United States for their education and to support them after they graduate. So if that means we've been part of a wide variety of of policy recommendations, of legal briefs, a whole variety of different things to try to make sure that international students who are such a wonderful gift to this campus and to the experience of all of our students are well supported. And that's everything from kind of thinking about what they need to be here when other students might not be here, food, well-being, support, to thinking about supporting their policies. And if you want to hear more about that, by the way, I encourage you to be on the election panel discussion on Monday evening, where one of our alumni who's been really working on the immigration platforms for one of the presidential campaigns will be speaking some more about some of the way that work happens. So let's see, a plan about how vaccines will be made available to the community. Oh yes, so there's a question here about vaccines for COVID-19 and their availability. We're just beginning to learn from the state of Ohio about the ways that they're thinking about vaccine distribution and vaccine priority. So we're at the very, very early phases there. I have the privilege of being in conversation regularly with some of the state leadership about their COVID response. And so I think we will have a good sense as that comes closer to reality about where colleges and universities will be in the sequencing of the priority for COVID vaccinations and how that relates to what we would need to be able to do on campus. We certainly have the capacity and capability to vaccinate a lot of people quickly, as we're demonstrating with our flu clinics, where we're getting through hundreds and hundreds of people in a day. But how exactly that'll work will depend on timing too, right? If the vaccine mostly becomes available to students not until the summer, we may be working more along the lines of mostly requiring vaccine before students arrive. If it becomes available while students are here on campus, then we would certainly be prepared to step forward and provide that vaccine. So I will just say that there are a couple of questions that arose about kind of how we're doing and what it's like to do this job right now. So I just wanted to conclude by responding to that, which is to say it is an extraordinary honor and privilege, and even, yes, definitely joy to be a part of this community, the College of Wooster community here every day, even on the hardest days, even as we make our way through navigating a really, really difficult situation. Our students are incredible. They've done amazing things, and they bring an extraordinary dedication and commitment and care for one another and for helping make things be as good as they possibly can be through what is a really difficult situation. They inspire me every day. They're making things happen on our campus and preparing to make things happen in the world that really, really matter. And they're extraordinary. And the larger Wooster family, the family of alumni and the family of parents and siblings and grandparents who are connected to our campus have also been extraordinary. You have put yourselves out there to support students, to support the campus, to advise us, and to provide what we need to help make sure that we're supporting the learning and growth of our students and their preparation for their futures. So I just can't thank you enough. We're extraordinarily grateful and extraordinarily glad to be a part of this family of Scots today and every day. So thank you so much for joining us. It's such a pleasure to be with you. I hope that before too long, we'll all be able to gather together in person and to celebrate the wonderful Wooster community together. But for now, thank you again for coming today. Please, if you'd like to learn more about the Lowry renovation and see more about those plans, join us at 1 o'clock. Otherwise, my thanks to all of you. Please take care, be well, stay safe, and go Scots. Bye, everybody.